chief captured a white woman breastfeeding her son and took an unexpected action. The sun was high in the sky, burning down on the dry land that stretched for miles. Villages lay scattered across the hills, and the river that ran through the valley was the only source of water for miles. It was in this remote area that the chief ruled. His authority was unquestioned. The people knew his power, and outsiders were rare. Those who ventured into his land without permission often faced consequences they could not imagine. The chief had seen many travelers, traders, and wanderers cross into his territory, and he always watched them carefully. He believed in protecting his land and his people, and he believed that anyone who entered without respect for his rules could be dangerous. On this particular afternoon, the chief's guards returned from a patrol with a surprising discovery. They had found a woman hiding near the riverbank, clutching a small child tightly to her chest. She was a stranger, not from any village they knew. Her skin was pale, her clothes were torn and dirty, and she looked weak from hunger and fear. Most importantly, she was breastfeeding her young son, trying to comfort him as he cried quietly in her arms. The sight of a mother caring for her child, even in such desperate conditions, was both fragile and powerful. The guards, unsure of what to do, brought her directly to the chief. The chief sat on his elevated platform, watching carefully as the woman was brought before him. She held her child tightly, rocking him gently. The baby's small hands clutched her clothing, and he nuzzled against her chest, completely dependent on her care. The chief could see the fear in her eyes, but he could also see a deep determination. She had been through a lot, yet she had not given up. Her presence was unusual in this part of the land, and the chief knew immediately that this was no ordinary traveler. Something about her, the way she cared for her child despite the harsh conditions, made him pause. The guards stood at attention, expecting the chief to speak. They expected him to demand punishment, as was the custom when outsiders entered the territory without permission. Yet the chief did not speak immediately. He leaned forward slightly, studying the woman carefully. She seemed tired beyond measure, her face pale and drawn from weeks of hardship. Her clothes were dirty from the journey, and her hair hung in tangled strands around her face. Despite all of this, she continued to care for her child, speaking to him softly in a language the chief did not understand. The way she whispered to her son with such love and care reminded him of the mothers in his own village, of the women who had nurtured his children and his grandchildren. It was a quiet, tender scene, but one that spoke louder than words. The woman's eyes met the chief's for the first time. They were wide and fearful, yet there was a glimmer of hope. She did not try to hide her child or herself. She simply held him close, as if willing to protect him with every ounce of strength she had left. The chief noticed how she adjusted the child carefully, making sure he was comfortable while feeding. He could see her hands trembling slightly, not from fear alone, but from exhaustion. She had traveled far, and the journey had taken its toll. She had crossed rivers, hills, and forests, avoiding dangers the chief could only imagine. And yet, despite everything, she had not given up. Her determination impressed him, even though she was a stranger in his land. The guards whispered among themselves, unsure what the chief would do. They were used to orders being given quickly: capture, punish, or expel. But this time there was a pause, a moment of stillness. The chief looked at the woman, and something inside him stirred. It was not fear, nor suspicion, nor anger. It was curiosity, and more than that, it was respect. He could see that she was not a threat. She was a mother, fighting to survive and protect her child. That simple realization began to shift the way he saw the situation. Perhaps she was not an enemy at all. Perhaps she was simply someone in need of help. For several minutes, the chief remained silent, observing her every movement. She rocked her son gently, humming softly in a language he did not know. Her voice was soothing, comforting, and filled with love. The baby's crying slowly subsided, and he began to fall asleep in her arms. The chief felt something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of connection. Despite the differences in language, culture, and background, he could understand the universal bond between a parent and a child. It was a bond that transcended borders, that went beyond fear or suspicion. In that moment, he realized that this woman, though a stranger, shared the same humanity as everyone in his land. The guards looked at him, waiting for an order, but he did not speak. Instead, he allowed himself to watch, to understand. He noticed how she gently stroked her son's head, how she whispered words that could not be heard, but whose meaning was clear in her actions. The chief thought of his own family, his own children, and the mothers in his village. He thought about the hardships they had faced, the sacrifices they had made to protect their families. And he realized that this woman, though different in appearance and language, had faced similar struggles. She had fought for her child in ways that required courage and strength beyond what most could imagine. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity to the guards, the chief spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and firm. He asked the woman her name, where she had come from, and why she was in his land. Though she struggled with words, she tried to answer, explaining that she had been traveling with her child and had become lost. She had no intention of entering his territory unlawfully. She had only been seeking safety and a place to rest. The chief listened carefully, not interrupting, allowing her to speak despite the language barrier. He could see her sincerity, her honesty, and it further confirmed what he had already begun to understand, that she was not a threat, but a desperate mother seeking help for her child. As she finished speaking, the chief leaned back slightly, considering his options. He could have ordered her to be taken away immediately, as the guards expected. He could have punished her for entering his land without permission, but something inside him refused. He saw in her the same love, determination, and resilience that existed in all parents. He saw a woman who had risked everything for the sake of her child, who had endured fear, hunger, and exhaustion, yet continued to care for her son. That courage, that humanity, demanded respect. The chief made a decision that would surprise everyone present. He would not punish her. He would not expel her. He would allow her a moment of safety and care, recognizing the universal bond between a parent and child. The guards exchanged astonished glances, unsure if they had heard correctly. The chief, however, remained firm. He instructed them to provide the woman and her child with water and food, and to offer a safe place to rest. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief and gratitude. For the first time since her capture, she felt a sense of relief, a small glimmer of hope that her journey might not end in disaster. She held her child close, rocking him gently as tears ran down her cheeks. The baby stirred, sensing the calmness in his mother, and slowly stopped crying. The tension in the room eased, replaced by a quiet understanding that sometimes, even in moments of fear and uncertainty, compassion could prevail. For the rest of the afternoon, the chief observed quietly as the woman and her son were cared for by his people. She ate small portions of food, drank water, and allowed herself a few moments to rest while keeping her child close. The chief noticed how carefully she interacted with everyone around her, how she smiled softly despite her fear, and how her actions conveyed gratitude without words. He realized that this moment, which had begun as a simple capture, was transforming into something more profound, a recognition of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. It was a lesson for him and his people, a reminder that even strangers could inspire empathy and respect. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, the chief reflected on what he had witnessed. He thought about how easily assumptions could lead to fear and misunderstanding. He thought about how the smallest acts of care and courage could reveal the true character of a person. And he understood that the woman before him, though an outsider, embodied qualities that all humans shared: love, sacrifice, and determination. The chief realized that leadership was not only about enforcing rules, but also about recognizing moments of humanity when they appeared, even in the most unexpected places. By the time night fell, the woman and her child were safely resting in a small hut near the river, protected by the chief's guards. She had no idea what the next day would bring, but she felt a strange sense of security she had not felt in weeks. The chief, meanwhile, returned to his platform, thinking about the lessons of the day. He knew that the encounter would be remembered, not as a story of capture, but as a story of understanding, compassion, and the unexpected power of empathy. What had begun as a tense moment of fear and uncertainty had grown into an experience that would shape the chief's view of outsiders and the strength of human connection. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the hills, casting a golden light across the village. The air was crisp, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filled the quiet spaces between the huts. The woman and her child were still resting in the small hut near the river, protected by the chief's guards. She had slept more deeply than she had in days, finally able to let go of some of the fear that had been pressing down on her since her capture. Her baby, too, was calm, warm against her chest as he slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like a long journey. Despite the safety she now had, she could not stop thinking about what might come next. She did not know the chief, nor did she know if he would allow her to leave. She could only wait and hope. Outside the hut, the chief walked quietly among his people. He observed the villagers going about their morning routines, fetching water, preparing food, tending to children, and caring for the animals. The rhythm of daily life was simple but disciplined, and the chief had long been proud of how well his people followed his guidance. Yet today, his thoughts were occupied by the woman he had allowed to stay. He thought about her courage, her love for her child, and the careful way she had carried herself despite exhaustion and fear. He found himself wondering how someone from so far away could survive so many challenges and still maintain such calm and dignity. It was a mystery to him, but one that left a mark on his mind. The woman, meanwhile, had begun to adjust to her temporary surroundings. She cautiously stepped out of the hut, carrying her baby, and looked around. The village was small, but it had a quiet beauty. Children played near the river, women chatted as they washed clothes, and men went about their daily tasks with steady focus. Though she could not understand the language fully, she could feel the sense of community, the rhythm of a life built on cooperation and trust. It was very different from the places she had known, yet in some ways it felt safe, something she had not felt in a long time. She whispered softly to her child, telling him that they were safe, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to breathe without fear. The chief had been watching her from a distance. He noticed the care she showed for her child, even in this new and unfamiliar environment. She made sure he had water, checked his clothing, and adjusted him comfortably in her arms. Every gesture, small and natural, spoke volumes about her character. The chief reflected on how similar this was to the mothers in his own village, how they nurtured their children with patience, devotion, and unwavering love. He realized that the bond between a parent and child was universal, crossing languages, cultures, and borders. It was in that recognition that he began to feel a growing respect for the woman. She was not just a stranger, she was a mother, like any other, and her bravery in caring for her child had earned his attention and admiration. As the morning progressed, the chief summoned the woman to speak with him. She approached cautiously, holding her baby tightly, unsure of what he would say. The guards parted to allow her passage, and she found herself standing before the chief once more. He greeted her in a calm, measured tone, asking simple questions. Her answers were slow, careful, and hesitant, but the chief could see the truth in her words. She had become lost while traveling through unfamiliar territory, and her primary concern had been the survival of her child. She had no intention of causing harm or disrespecting the chief or his people. Her sincerity was clear, and it reminded the chief that appearances alone could be misleading. Not everyone who arrived unexpectedly was a threat. Some were simply in need. During their conversation, the chief noticed that she was remarkably composed despite her exhaustion and fear. She had endured challenges that would have broken many others, yet she remained focused on her child, never letting despair overtake her entirely. He could see the love in her eyes as she looked down at her baby, the small movements she made to soothe him, and the gentle words she whispered. It was a private world of care and protection, but it had opened itself to him in this brief encounter. For the chief, this was a moment of learning, a lesson in patience and observation. He began to understand that strength was not only measured in power or authority, but also in the quiet courage it took to care for another being. The woman, sensing the chief's watchful gaze, continued to speak, telling him a little about her journey. She described the challenges she had faced along the way, long days of walking, nights spent hiding in the cold, and the constant fear of being discovered. She had survived on very little food and water, relying on determination and hope to push forward. As she spoke, the chief realized that she had faced dangers and hardships that his people could not even imagine. Her endurance and resilience were extraordinary, yet she spoke softly, without complaint or exaggeration. She did not ask for favors or mercy, she only sought understanding. That humility and honesty impressed him greatly. The chief considered what actions would be fair and just. He could send her away immediately, as the rules of the land demanded, or he could offer protection and care. In his heart, he felt drawn toward the latter. He understood that she was a mother first, and that her child depended entirely on her. Punishing her would not only harm her, but would also harm the innocent child. Compassion, he realized, was sometimes more powerful than strict adherence to rules. And so he made the decision to provide assistance, ensuring the woman and her child would have food, water, and a place to rest. This choice surprised some of the guards who had expected punishment, but it was a decision rooted in empathy and humanity. Over the following days, the woman began to recover physically and emotionally. She ate proper meals, drank clean water, and allowed herself small moments of rest while keeping her child close. She began to notice the rhythms of the village, the laughter of children, the preparation of meals, and the careful attention villagers paid to each other. It was a different life from the one she had known, yet it offered stability and safety. She observed the chief quietly, noting how he balanced authority with kindness, maintaining order while also respecting the dignity of his people. She did not fully understand his words, but she could sense the fairness in his actions. Slowly, a sense of trust began to develop. The chief, in turn, watched her closely. He noticed how she adapted to her surroundings, how she interacted with the villagers, and how she continued to care for her child without complaint. Her presence had a subtle effect on those around her as well. The villagers, initially wary, began to show her small gestures of kindness, offering food, helping with chores, and sharing smiles. The chief realized that her courage and gentle demeanor were teaching his people lessons as well. She was not only surviving, she was influencing the environment around her in ways that no force or authority could. One morning, the chief walked to the riverbank and found the woman sitting quietly, her child asleep in her arms. She was watching the water flow, listening to the birds and taking a moment to breathe. The chief approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He asked her simple questions, trying to learn more about her past, her experiences, and her hopes for the future. She answered carefully, explaining that her journey had been long and difficult, but that she had kept moving forward because she believed in the possibility of safety and kindness. Her answers were honest and heartfelt, and the chief could see that despite everything, she had not lost hope. That hope, he realized, was a powerful force that drove her courage and resilience. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between the chief and the woman grew, though it was unspoken and subtle. He began to see her not as an outsider, but as a person with a story, struggles, and a heart full of love for her child. He began to reflect on his own leadership, considering how empathy could complement authority. The woman's presence was changing him, reminding him that understanding and compassion were as important as strength and rules. He watched how she nurtured her child, how she handled challenges with patience, and how she interacted respectfully with those around her. Each action reinforced the lesson he was learning. Humanity transcended differences in language, culture, and appearance. The woman herself noticed small changes in the village as well. Children who had been shy approached her and her son with curiosity, and the villagers began to accept her presence as part of their daily life. She started to teach small skills to the children: how to care for younger siblings, how to find edible plants along the river, and simple songs to soothe infants. Her gentle guidance and experience as a mother became a bridge between her and the villagers. The chief observed all of this quietly, recognizing that her influence extended far beyond her own child. She was helping others, not intentionally seeking praise, but simply acting with the kindness and wisdom that only comes from lived experience. As the sun set each evening, the chief reflected on the lessons of the day. He realized that what had begun as a simple capture had become an opportunity for learning and growth. The woman had demonstrated resilience, courage, and empathy, qualities that were universal and inspiring. Her presence had challenged assumptions, taught patience, and reminded him of the power of compassion. He began to understand that leadership required not just enforcing rules, but also recognizing moments of humanity, even in the most unexpected places. The chief knew that this encounter would remain with him for the rest of his life, shaping the way he saw the world and the people in it. Days passed, and the woman and her child began to settle into a quiet rhythm in the village. Though the woman was still cautious, she slowly started to trust the chief's people. She learned where to get clean water, where to find fruits and vegetables, and how to prepare simple meals. Each day, she watched the villagers closely, noticing their routines and habits. At first, she kept mostly to herself, staying near her small hut with her child, but gradually she began to interact with the children and women in the village. Her warmth and care drew others toward her. People began to offer smiles, gentle gestures, and quiet conversations. Though language was a barrier, kindness was universal. She discovered that even without fully understanding each other, human connection could flourish. The chief observed all of this quietly from a distance at first, and then more directly. He saw how the woman's presence was slowly influencing the village. Children who had been shy or afraid now approached her and her son with curiosity. Women began to interact with her, asking questions and sharing advice. Even some of the guards, initially skeptical of the outsider, began to see her as more than just a stranger. They saw a mother, a survivor, and someone who carried dignity despite her hardships. The chief realized that she had an unusual strength, one that did not rely on weapons or authority but on patience, care, and quiet courage. This was a strength he respected deeply. One morning, the chief called the woman to meet him near the riverbank. She approached cautiously, holding her child closely, unsure of what he would say. But when she arrived, the chief's expression was calm and thoughtful, not stern or commanding as she had feared. He gestured for her to sit beside him. She lowered herself carefully, making sure her baby was comfortable in her arms. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other in silence. The chief was thinking about what he had learned over the past days, and the woman was trying to understand what he might want from her. Then, the chief spoke. He asked her about her journey, about the places she had been, and the struggles she had endured to keep her child alive. She answered carefully, speaking slowly and clearly, her voice quiet but steady. She told him about walking for days without food, sleeping in the open air, hiding from dangers she could not name, and never losing hope that she would find safety for herself and her son. The chief listened intently, absorbing every word. Her story was filled with fear and hardship, but also with courage, resilience, and determination. Each sentence painted a vivid picture of a woman who refused to give up, no matter the obstacles. He felt respect and even admiration for her bravery. It was clear that she had endured far more than most people ever would in their lives, and yet she was still caring for her child with unwavering devotion. The chief reflected on his own life as he listened. He thought about the challenges he had faced, the responsibilities of leading his people, and the times he had struggled to make the right decisions. He realized that strength could take many forms. It could be found in authority, in leadership, and in power, but it could also be found in quiet acts of love and perseverance. The woman's courage, her selflessness, and her determination to protect her child were powerful lessons. The chief began to see that leadership was not just about giving orders or enforcing rules. It was also about recognizing and respecting the strength in others, even in unexpected forms. Over the next few days, the chief continued to observe the woman, and he made a surprising decision. Rather than treating her as a captive or outsider, he decided to involve her more in the life of the village. He instructed his people to provide extra support for her, ensuring she had enough food, clean clothing, and safe shelter for herself and her child. The woman, initially hesitant and shy, began to feel a sense of stability she had not known in weeks. With each passing day, her confidence grew. She began to interact more openly with the villagers, helping them with small tasks and teaching her own knowledge in return. She showed them ways to soothe children, prepare simple remedies, and care for the young. Slowly but surely, she became part of the rhythm of the village, no longer just an outsider surviving among strangers. Her child also began to thrive. With consistent care and nourishment, he gained strength and energy. His cries became less frequent, replaced by coos and laughter that brightened the days of everyone around him. The chief could see the bond between mother and child growing stronger with each passing day, and he was reminded once again of the universal power of parental love. He noticed how the villagers began to admire the woman's patience and devotion. Her presence was teaching them lessons about resilience, compassion, and dedication. She was influencing the village in ways that no one had anticipated, not through authority or instruction, but simply through the way she cared for her child and others. One afternoon, the chief invited the woman to walk with him along the river. They strolled slowly, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. She was nervous at first, unsure of why he wanted her to accompany him, but she sensed that this walk was not a test. It was a gesture of trust. The chief spoke little at first, allowing her to enjoy the quiet sounds of the river and the gentle rustling of leaves. Then he asked her about her hopes and dreams. She hesitated, thinking carefully before answering. She spoke about wanting to find safety for her child, to live in peace, and perhaps one day to return to her home or find a new place to call her own. The chief listened attentively. Though he did not fully understand her language, he could sense the sincerity and depth of her words. He recognized a universal desire, the desire to protect family, to survive, and to live with dignity. The chief decided to take another unexpected step. He called a meeting with his advisors and villagers to discuss how they could assist the woman in her journey. He did not want to impose his decisions on her. He wanted to offer help, guidance, and protection. The villagers were initially hesitant. They were not used to dealing with outsiders in such a personal and compassionate way, but the chief's calm authority reassured them. He explained that the woman was not a threat, and that providing care for her and her child was the right thing to do. Over time, the villagers began to accept this, and small acts of support began to appear. Some offered baskets of food, others shared blankets and clothing. Even the children in the village learned to play gently with the baby, bringing smiles to both mother and child. The woman began to feel something she had not felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. She had come to the village as a frightened stranger, but she was slowly becoming part of its rhythm. She still longed to find a permanent home, but for now, she felt safe and supported. Her gratitude toward the chief grew each day, and she could see that he, too, was learning from her presence. He was learning that courage could be quiet, strength could be gentle, and leadership could include empathy. He watched her interact with the villagers, care for her child, and handle challenges with patience. Each small moment reinforced the lessons he was learning, lessons that he would carry with him long after the woman and her child had moved on. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the chief observed the woman and her son playing near the river. Her child laughed and reached out for pebbles, while she encouraged him gently, her eyes shining with love. The chief felt a profound sense of respect and admiration. He realized that this simple scene, mother and child playing together, held more power than any demonstration of authority or control. It was a reminder that life, love, and compassion were forces stronger than fear or anger. He thought about how easily he could have treated her as an outsider to be punished or feared, and he felt grateful that he had chosen another path. The woman, too, felt a change within herself. She had arrived in the village exhausted, frightened, and unsure of the future. Now she felt a sense of hope and security. She had discovered that even in the most unexpected places, people could show kindness, understanding, and humanity. The chief's decision to treat her with compassion had allowed her to heal, to regain her strength, and to care for her child without constant fear. She began to see the village not just as a temporary refuge, but as a place of learning, growth, and connection. As the days continued, the bond between the chief, the woman, and the villagers deepened. The chief allowed her more freedom, encouraging her to explore the surroundings, speak with villagers, and engage in small tasks. She taught children how to care for infants, shared her knowledge of basic survival skills, and helped organize small routines for the community. The villagers learned to trust her judgment, and they began to respect her presence. The woman's child grew stronger, happier, and more curious each day, and his laughter became a symbol of hope for everyone. By the end of part 3, the chief had made a profound decision. He understood that kindness and compassion could change lives in ways that power and authority could not. The woman had survived not only because of her own courage, but because someone had chosen to see her humanity rather than her differences. And in that choice, the chief and his people learned a lesson that would stay with them forever. That empathy, patience, and understanding could build bridges where fear and suspicion once stood. The village, once cautious and wary, had now embraced the presence of this mother and her child, discovering a deeper sense of connection and humanity that would remain long after their departure. Time passed, and the woman and her child had become familiar faces in the village. What had begun as fear, uncertainty, and caution had slowly transformed into trust, understanding, and even warmth. She had learned the routines of the villagers, how to gather water safely, how to prepare simple meals, and how to care for her child in a new environment. The baby, once frail and frightened, now thrived, smiling and laughing as he explored the small spaces around their temporary home. Each day, he grew stronger, his energy returning in leaps and bounds. The woman felt relief and gratitude she could not fully express. She had arrived scared, alone, and desperate, yet she had found safety and support in a place she had once thought entirely foreign. The chief continued to observe her quietly, appreciating her courage, her resilience, and the way she handled each challenge with grace. He noticed her patience as she cared for her child, as she interacted with villagers, and as she adapted to unfamiliar surroundings. Though he had initially seen her as a stranger who needed to be captured, he now saw her as a person who had taught everyone around her invaluable lessons about love, strength, and determination. Her presence reminded him of something he had long known but sometimes forgotten. That leadership was not only about power or authority, but also about understanding, empathy, and respect for the struggles of others. One morning, the chief called her to meet him at the riverbank, where the water reflected the soft light of dawn. She approached slowly, holding her child close, unsure of what to expect. Yet when she saw the chief's calm and steady expression, she relaxed slightly. He gestured for her to sit beside him, and for a while they simply watched the river flow in silence. The baby gurgled happily in her arms, reaching out to splash the water gently. The chief smiled faintly, watching this small moment of innocence and joy. It was a stark contrast to the fear and uncertainty of the first time they had met. The chief finally spoke, his voice gentle and deliberate. He told her that she had impressed him, not only with her courage and resilience, but also with her compassion and determination to care for her child despite overwhelming challenges. The woman listened, her heart pounding with emotion. She had expected harsh words, commands, or instructions to leave immediately, but instead, she was met with recognition and respect. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, the weight of his acknowledgement of her struggle. It was a moment that would remain with her forever, a rare affirmation that her efforts to survive and protect her child were seen and valued. She nodded slowly, holding her baby closer, as if to anchor herself in the certainty of this unexpected kindness. Over the next few days, the chief made another surprising decision. He spoke with his advisors and villagers, explaining that while she would eventually continue her journey, they must provide her with guidance, resources, and protection until she could leave safely. The villagers, who had grown accustomed to her presence and admired her courage, agreed readily. They began preparing supplies for her, baskets of food, clean clothing, and blankets for her child. They also marked a safe path that she could follow when it was time to leave, showing her how to avoid dangers along the way. The woman watched their careful preparations with gratitude, realizing that their support extended far beyond what she could have expected from strangers. During this time, she also shared her knowledge with the villagers. She taught small lessons about caring for children, about finding edible plants, and about basic hygiene and safety practices. Though her words were sometimes limited by the language barrier, her actions and demonstrations communicated everything clearly. The villagers learned from her without even realizing it. They saw her patience, her skill, and her unwavering commitment to her child, and they absorbed these lessons naturally. The chief observed all of this quietly, recognizing the impact she had on the community. She was leaving a mark, not through authority or command, but through example, empathy, and courage. The woman, too, began to reflect on her experience. She realized that she had grown stronger, not just because of the safety and support provided by the chief and his people, but because of the lessons she had learned about resilience and trust. She understood that courage was not always about confronting danger directly, but sometimes about remaining steadfast in the face of fear, about protecting those you love, and about finding hope in the smallest gestures of kindness. She had seen this in the chief, in the villagers, and even in herself. She knew that the lessons she had learned here would stay with her for the rest of her life. As the day approached for her departure, the village gathered to see her off. The chief, standing quietly among his people, watched her prepare her belongings. She had packed only what was necessary, some food, blankets, and supplies, but each item represented her careful planning and foresight. The villagers came forward to offer final gifts and words of encouragement. Children ran to give her handmade toys, women presented food for the journey, and the guards offered guidance and protection for the path ahead. The woman's heart swelled with gratitude and emotion. She had arrived as a frightened stranger, but she was leaving as a part of this community, carrying with her the warmth, respect, and lessons she had gained. The chief stepped forward to speak to her privately. He reminded her of the path they had marked and the safe spaces along the way. He spoke of the importance of continuing her journey carefully and encouraged her to trust in her own courage and resourcefulness. The woman nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. She held her child tightly and whispered words of thanks. Though she could not fully express her feelings, the chief could see them in her actions. The careful way she held her child, the reverent way she packed her belongings, and the respectful, humble manner in which she prepared to leave. When it was time to set out, the woman and her child began their journey along the path the chief had marked. The villagers watched silently, offering blessings and small gestures of support. The baby laughed and reached for the chief, as if recognizing the kindness he had shown. The chief smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that he had made a difference, not just for the woman and her child, but for his people as well. They had seen firsthand the impact of compassion, understanding, and empathy. The chief knew that this story would remain in the memory of the village for years to come, a lesson in the unexpected power of humanity. As the woman and her child disappeared into the horizon, the chief returned to his platform, reflecting on everything that had transpired. He thought about the initial moment of capture, the fear and tension, and how it had transformed into something entirely different. He realized that life often presents unexpected situations, and that choices made with compassion and wisdom can have far-reaching effects. The woman's courage had inspired him, taught his people, and reminded him of the true meaning of leadership. The chief knew that strength was not only measured in authority or force, but in empathy, patience, and the ability to recognize humanity in others, even strangers. The woman, walking along the path with her child in her arms, felt a mixture of emotions, gratitude, relief, and hope. She reflected on the kindness of the chief and his people, realizing that even in the darkest and most uncertain moments, there could be light. She thought about the lessons she had learned about resilience, trust, and compassion, and how they would guide her in the days ahead. Her child, now full of energy and curiosity, gurgled happily in her arms, and she smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Though the road ahead was long, she felt confident in her ability to face whatever challenges might come, armed with the knowledge that humanity and kindness existed even in the most unexpected places. Weeks later, as she continued her journey, the woman often thought back to the village and the chief. She remembered the quiet strength in his eyes, the fairness of his decisions, and the warmth he had shown despite their differences. She carried with her not just memories, but also lessons about courage, compassion, and the enduring power of human connection. The chief, in turn, reflected on the experience often, sharing the story with his people, reminding them of the importance of empathy and the strength found in small acts of kindness. The encounter had left a permanent mark on both their lives, demonstrating that understanding and compassion could transform fear into respect, strangers into allies, and uncertainty into hope. In the end, the woman and her child found their way to safety, strengthened by the lessons learned and the support received along the journey. The chief returned to his village, forever changed by the experience, carrying with him a renewed understanding of what it meant to lead with both strength and humanity. The story of their encounter spread through the village, remembered not as a tale of capture, but as a story of courage, compassion, and the unexpected bonds that can form when people choose to see the humanity in one another. It became a lasting reminder that even in moments of fear, hardship, or uncertainty, kindness and understanding could guide the way, creating hope and forging connections that transcend differences of culture, language, and background.